Welcome to Wellness Curated by Anshu Bahanda. Today, we're going to talk about transforming menopause through intelligent stress management. And for that, we have someone very special today. We have Katrine Cakuls, who's a manual therapist and a Canadian qualified physio and osteopath. She's worked internationally in Canada, in England, Australia, in the US. She's addressed all levels of fitness and health, and her work has been featured on the national television. She's been quoted in books. She works with a network of practitioners, including medical consultants, psychotherapists, acupuncturists, homeopaths, and movement specialists. Welcome to the chat, Katrine.
Thank you for inviting me, Anshu. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. So tell me, how are stress and menopause related?
Well, I'm glad to be talking about this. So menopause is a big transition in a woman's life. It's a natural transition in her hormonal life, but it does bring on big changes, and the brain doesn't like changes. Going away from the familiar is really difficult for the brain because the brain is always looking for familiar patterns to take us back to. And that's not what's happening in menopause. Things are changing. This can be very stressful, on top of the fact that most women going through menopause are between the ages of 45 to 55, when there are many other stressful factors, such as dealing with aging parents, such as dealing with maintaining a household, raising children, dealing with spousal relationships, and all on top of this, trying to hold down a job. So taking care of all of this on top of having hormones that are shifting, which is the change that's going on in menopause, can make for a very bumpy and difficult ride if the stress of the life isn't well managed. And that's why I wanted to present this talk, and that's why I do this approach with women in menopause in my practice, is to provide them with a method to transform their menopause.
Okay, that's lovely. Now, tell me, what is the stress response to menopause? When we talk about, everyone talks about being stressed during menopause, but explain that to us a little more.
So let's start with the stress response in general, because the stress response is generic, whether you're in menopause or not. The stress response is, stress, let's start with that, is an emotion in relation to something that is not in balance with what we're feeling internally. So, for instance, if we have a fear of going for a job interview or going on a first date, so it could be a mental picture, or it can be something really physical. We're standing in front of an angry tiger. In both cases, whether the stressor is imagined or whether it's actually real, you get the same response. And that's a very key point to remember in what I'm going to say. And the stress response is very set. It acts very quickly, and it always acts in the same way. You get this rush of biochemicals flowing through your body that do a couple of things. Number one, they get you into action because it's a survival response. So the first thing that it does is it takes blood away from your digestion and away from reproduction. Because if you're standing in front of a tiger, you don't have time to digest, you don't have time to reproduce. So it pumps blood instead to the heart and our large muscles. So we get increased heart rate, increased breathing, we start to sweat, and we're ready to go into action. All of our senses are heightened, right? And what's important here in relation to menopause is that one of the glands that's activated during the stress response is called the adrenal gland. It sits down sort of by our waist, just above the kidney on both sides. And what adrenal glands do, besides being part of the response unit of the stress response, in menopause, they actually make secondary hormones, estrogen and progesterone, to help to balance out the hormonal shifts of menopause. Now, if you're constantly under stress and the adrenals are busy taking care of the tiger, again, real or not, then they won't be able to kick in and help you to even out menopause and the shifts of the hormones. So that's the relationship of the stress response with menopause.
Okay. So now let's sort of talk a little bit. Let's discuss with people what are the main symptoms that happen to women during menopause. So I know it's different for everyone, but what do you see as the main symptoms?
Mm-hmm. So if you're asking me directly, the fluctuation in estrogen and progesterone that happen at menopause cause a lot of different symptoms, but some of the main ones are fatigue or low energy, insomnia, weight gain, changes in libido, usually a lowering of libido, some poor concentration like brain fog, and some bladder issues, and sometimes some joint aches and pains. And so if you want to relate that to what the neuroscientists have found to explain that, I've got a very interesting quote here by Dr. Lisa Mosconi. She's listed on my Instagram on the actual post regarding today's interview here. And you can look her up there. She's written an excellent book that I like, The Double X Brain. She's also written Brain Food. And she describes that what some people might not realize is that in your brain, there are little receptors. So these are these little areas that estrogen goes into and sort of makes an action happen, right? But during menopause, because there's a lowering of estrogen, those areas of the brain change their function. And she's very specific because she does a lot of research on the brain, particularly women's brains, which I think is an overlooked area. And she describes, for instance, very specifically that there's this part of the brain inside, deep inside, called the hypothalamus. And if the estrogen is low, it doesn't activate the hypothalamus, right? So the hypothalamus is involved in regulating body temperature. So the hot flashes that you get, that's the hypothalamus, okay? So sometimes it's just good, I feel, I don't know about other women, to really know that there's something concrete going on in the body, you know, and it's not just take a pill and do this and forget about it. You really use the techniques that I'll go through to work to help this. Another change in the brain that happens because the little receptors aren't getting the estrogen is down here at the base of the head. There's the brain stem where the brain narrows into the spinal cord, and that is in charge of sleep and wakefulness. So when estrogen doesn't activate the brainstem correctly, we have trouble sleeping. So again, you know, you can say it's due to a million different reasons, but this is one big reason. And going back to what we were saying earlier, if you look at stress, making secondary estrogen and progesterone, you want that to kick in to help with sleeping. So take care of your stress.
Okay.
Then the last part of the brain, two parts, and these are names that I'm just putting out there because sometimes people will read these, you know, if you're reading health, there are words that come up, but you don't have to remember them. There's the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain, close to another center that's the memory center called the hippocampus. And so again, when estrogen levels start to shift in these areas, you get mood swings and you forget things. So thank you to Dr. Lisa Mosconi, because she really has been able to put her finger on a lot of specific areas of the brain that really can describe some of the symptoms that women go through frequently with menopause. Now, what's interesting is that if you look at stress and what stress causes in terms of changes, right? You're going to get low energy. You are going to get weight gain. You're going to get difficulties with sleep. You're going to get muscle joint aches and pains. You won't be able to think as clearly. So if you look at that, it's almost a mirror to the menopausal symptoms, right?
Right.
So stress, menopausal symptoms, very similar. Decrease stress, you're going to help the menopausal symptoms. Right?
Okay.
So that's what I would say about the stress response in particular.
So you're saying that the important thing to remember in life during menopause specifically is decreased stress, and the menopausal symptoms will go down. Now, I know you talk quite a lot about intelligent stress management during menopause. Can you explain to us what you mean by that?
Sure. This is a term that I've coined, transforming menopause through intelligent stress management. Mm-hmm. And I've coined this term, because I really wanted to find an approach for menopausal women that was scientifically evidence-based, that provided techniques, tools, and information that can be applied easily, learned easily, and adapted to be used anywhere at any time. And it's simple techniques, straightforward techniques. So I really like the practical, because there are all kinds of fancy things we can do where we need to go to a spa and sit there for a while. Those are great. By all means, I support them. But I like the intelligence of having something scientifically backed that we can grab onto when we're in the bus, when we're dealing with our kids. Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of key points to this approach. And one of the key points that I want to start with is that this approach teaches how you can decrease the intensity of the stress response in the moment it happens, right away. Okay? And this is super, super important, because we don't realize how many stressors we engage on a daily basis. You're on the bus and somebody's pushing you around. You're with your colleagues and somebody keeps interrupting during the meeting. And you've forgotten your money when you go to buy your lunch. Whatever it is, there's small stressors that keep accumulating during the day. And the interesting thing is that every time there's a stressor, it activates the stress response right away. And it takes a little while for the stress response to come back down. So if you're constantly turning on the stress response like this, you stay at a high stress level and you're taxing the adrenal gland, again, that's supposed to be helping with menopause. So by the end of the day, you go to the gym and you think you're going to take care of it, but you're exhausted and you're hungry and you go and buy a donut instead. And then you go home and you're irritable, right? So being able to have a tool where you can immediately take down that intensity of the stress response, for me, is really key. And again, it can be by anybody, anywhere. It stops the energy drain that the stress response brings on, because responding to stress requires energy. So taking down the intensity stops that energy drain. So it's revitalizing. You'll have a little extra energy at the end of the day. Maybe you will go to the gym instead of having the donut, or do both, whatever you like. The other thing that it does is that it improves your performance, because when you let's go back to the stress response. When you're stressed, it's survival. You've got to act really quickly. You've got to think really quickly. It's not the time to reflect, to sort of think deeply and make longer term decisions, or really go back into deep memory and try to pull something forward. So let's say that you're in a meeting and somebody's asking you difficult questions and you're stressed. Do something quickly to take down the stress response. You'll be able to analyze, pull out all those things that you remember and present them and improve your performance. With the stress response, too, you don't have as good access to your intuition. Take down the intensity. You're in that meeting. You're not sure what thing to choose. You choose. better with your intuition when the intensity of stress is less. Also, it'll give you a way to better respond to things. So for instance, if you respond like that really quickly and snap into something, you may think, oh, I wish I didn't say that. Taking down the stress response gives you that second to reflect and make a better choice in responding. And so this allows you to put your best foot forward and to feel better about yourself, that you didn't make an awkward reaction either at work or at home with your children or your spouse. So this is the first really important point in the intelligent stress management. The second point I'd like to make has to do with becoming self-aware of your emotions. Okay, so this approach teaches you about your emotions and your emotional patterns. And this is another moment where I'd like to quote another neuroscientist that I adore. Her name is Dr. Candace Pert, and she was an incredible, incredible neuroscientist and pharmacologist, and she wrote a wonderful book called The Molecules of Emotion. And so I'm going to quote from her: our physical body can be changed by the emotions we experience. And in fact, she goes to the point of saying that there is no body and no mind. She calls it the body mind. And so just to go through this a little bit more, every emotion you feel and every thought you think creates a cascade of electrochemical signals that go everywhere in your body. Negative emotions, negative thoughts, hate, fear, jealousy, loathing, create signals that actually shut down cell function. Whereas positive emotions, joy, gratitude, hope, love, do the exact opposite and improve cell function. This has also been spoken about a lot by Dr. Bruce Lipton, another person I love, who is a cell biologist and wrote the book, The Biology of Belief. And so he looked at the fact that if you put cells in a petri dish, and if you put them in a different substance, it'll change how the cells function. So again, negative thoughts, negative emotions really can change your health for the better or for the worse. And so in intelligent stress management, for me, it's very important to become aware of our emotions and our emotional patterns, right? So one of the things as well that's really important in this that I've added into the intelligent stress management is hands-on treatment. So through my osteopathic training, I work on people that come in for a variety of things. They might have sprained their ankle on the way to the audition of their life. I can work on their ankle and they burst out into tears saying, I missed my audition. And that's because, as Candace Pert explains scientifically, again, this is not just something she's made up, it's all hard science, that those thoughts, memories are stored in tissues. And so what I've found for decades, I've been practicing over 30 years, is that when I treat people, they could have come in for a sprained thumb. I can be working on their body, and again, they'll burst out in anger, I hate my boss. And then they say, oh my God, where did that come from? So the body stores memories. And so one of the things that I do with menopausal women when I'm using this approach is I do hands-on work. They'll come in, we'll work on relieving tension in their body. There might be specific issues, there might not be, right? But in working on them to relieve those tensions, to relieve the specific issues, sometimes emotions come up. Sometimes I feel emotions that may be stuck and ask if they're aware of that. And so becoming aware of emotions allows us to work with repatterning our emotions, right? And this again takes me to another quote, right? By another researcher that I really like, Joe Dispenza. And he wrote many books, which I'm sure you know of, but the one I'm going to quote here is Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. Right? So tying this all back into change and into menopause, menopause is a great time of change. So if you want to go with the flow, go with the change, you may need to shift who you are in relation to how your body's acting, in relation to how your mind may be working, in relation to when you turn inwards and look at your emotions, maybe patterns that you no longer want. And what Joe Dispenza very clearly says is our routine thoughts and feelings perpetuate the same reality. So if we're constantly thinking and feeling a certain way, we maintain our reality. So you need to think, feel, act in different ways, be different in order to change your reality, right? And that may seem like an overwhelming thing, but there are some very, very basic steps that you can take. And we can go through one or two ideas.
Okay. So that was wonderful. And you've given us a lot to think about there. Especially what I particularly think was amazing was how you talk about every thought. It's almost live. And that's the concept we've grown up with. That's the philosophy I've grown up with. That every thought has a reaction. And that's exactly what you're saying. But
Absolutely.
what I would love, Katrine, is if you can give us exactly what you were saying, if you can give us some practical tools that we can take away. So you said a woman could be sitting on a bus and she can help herself, right? Or something that people can build into their lives, which will help them cope better.
So let's start with something that Professor Andrew Huberman speaks about. He's another neuroscientist at Stanford. And I like the way that he presented this. And this is a technique that will immediately take down the intensity of the stress response. And it's called the physiological sigh. So,
it's called the physiological
sigh, S-I-G-H, sigh. Okay. And so the concept of this is that, or the idea behind this is that it's a breathing technique, right? And the breathing here is that exhalation phase is longer than inhalation phase, okay? So some people term it, rather than the physiological sigh, they call it exhalation dominant breathing, right? So we'll go through it now. So I'm going to show you, and then we can practice. Really easy. So
wonderful.
It's ready?
Yeah.
So what I want to just point out here is it's not two breaths. It's sort of one long breath and then just a little extra breath and then really long exhale. So one more time.
So you breathe in twice and then you exhale, you do a long exhale. Is that what you're doing?
Yes. But again, it's not breathing in twice. It's one sort of two-step breath. It's one breath in two steps. So this is two breaths, right? Whereas it's sort of, you take in as much breath as you can and a little bit more, and then you let out the long breath.
And the breathing out is quite gentle and relaxed and long. Is that right?
I didn't read or hear anything that it was emphasized to that, so, I could go, but I think the quicker and the stronger you breathe out, it'll shorten the breath, right?
Okay.
So if you want to try it with me, we can all try it now. Okay.
Yes.
So that's okay. And just to let you know that you can do one of these, you can do two of them, you can do three in a row, take a little break, and then do a couple of cycles of that. See how you feel. what Dr. Huberman points out is that naturally we sometimes do this anyway in response to, let's say you've been sobbing out of control. You know, you do that kind of a thing at the end, but this is something that you can control yourself. And this is really important in menopause as well, because menopause can seem like it's out of control. So these are techniques that can help to put you into control, right?
Okay.
So that's the first practical technique.
Before we go away from this one,
Yeah.
Katrine, can you tell us how many times would you recommend people do this? So for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, every day, twice a day, what?
So that's what I was just saying there a second ago, that when you do this sigh, you can repeat it 2 or 3 times in a row. So 2 to 3 sighs, 1 to 3 sighs. That might be enough.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
See how stressed out you are. You might think, 3 didn't do anything. And then you might do another 3, and then another 3. You know? So this isn't so much like a revitalizing technique, which would be a longer inhalation, shorter exhalation, like a yawn. Like a yawn energizes, right? Which is a longer inhalation and a shorter exhalation. This sort of longer exhalation calms you down. So you do it as many times as you like. Okay. Same thing with the yawn, you know, the longer inhalation, the shorter, that's revitalizing. You know, I mean, you're going to yawn if you're tired anyway, but if you feel you're flagging in a meeting and you want to get, you know, a little bit more vitality to help you to think more clearly, try the sniff, you know, long exhalation, and then do a yawn to help you to think more clearly. You can combine it as you want, but yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do this once. Do you want to do them together, or do you want to just do the yawn first?
Well, we can do this sniff is probably best to be done on its own, and then you just wait a while, and then if you need to add the yawn later, right? Okay.
Yeah. So you go.
Most likely.
So it's breathing in much longer and then just breathing out quickly.
Yeah, it's just like, right? However you want to do it. From what I've understood is it doesn't matter whether you breathe, because with a yawn, we often breathe in through our mouth. Just a standard yawn. So, and that'll help to revitalize. Okay. And sometimes people do that, for instance, if they're really tired, they do it naturally when they're running. They might do a longer breath in and then just shorter out. So again, play around with how you feel. And that's what I really like about the technique as well. And this approach is that it's geared to what you need in the moment. You have these tools that you can pull out anywhere. Another one that's a slight variation on it, and you don't have to exaggerate it like this. You can, for instance, sort of go, or you can either do it through your mouth. So if you don't want to seem a little overwhelming, if you're in front of somebody, or the other thing that you can do, and this comes.
Can you talk us through this, Katrine? What did you just do? Can you talk us through this?
Sure. So what I'm saying is that the sigh, as I presented it initially, might be a little overwhelming to use in certain situations, and people might think, what are you doing? And so what I'm saying is you can tone it down, sort of, you can make it.
So you're saying you can make it very subtle and quiet, but the technique is the same, where you breathe in twice and then you breathe out for a longer exhalation.
The key to this technique is that the exhalation, the breathing out, has to be much longer than the breathing in. Okay? So we've got the adaptation for the longer breathing out phrase. And then what I was going to say, if still that doesn't feel comfortable to you, you can turn to a technique by HeartMath, which is an institute that has looked at the relationship between the heart and the brain and their communication. Heart and brain are constantly in communication. We can go into more of their work in a minute, but they talk about heart-focused breathing, where you bring your attention into the area of the heart. And sometimes, if I'm on the telephone and I really can't focus on that, if I'm too stressed, I'll put my hand in the area of the heart, right? Just hold my hand there. And you can either just imagine your breath flowing in and out of that area, or what HeartMath suggests is that you can breathe in for 5 seconds and breathe out for 5 seconds. And breathe in for 5 seconds, and breathe out for 5 seconds. And this, according to HeartMath, regulates heartbeat rhythms, right? The more your heartbeat is in a sine wave-like rhythm, the more your body functions harmoniously, and we can go into this in a minute again. So those are two ways of using breathing to immediately take down the stress response, right?
Okay.
So another, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, so if you want to move on to something else that I would suggest, right, is sitting on what I call the thought highway, right? So we're moving away from a breathing technique, moving more towards thought, right? And we're going to tie emotion into this. So one of the things, just to go back to HeartMath for a second, that HeartMath emphasizes is that to shift into this very healthy, coherent state, harmonious state in the body, it's really important for us to feel a positive emotion. Okay?
Okay.
So what we can do, sort of just taking a step back before we get to the thought highway, is that if we're sitting and we're imagining the breath flowing in and out of our heart area, we're doing either the sniff, sniff out, or doing the 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. HeartMath suggests to make a sincere attempt to feel a positive emotion. So if you start to maybe think about the dog you love, or imagine that you're sitting in the favorite place you have for vacation, or you feel so grateful that you got the place on the bus during the strike, whatever it is, whatever that positive emotion is, that you have warm, comfortable shoes on, whatever it is, going into a positive and feeling a positive emotion creates a cascade of electrochemicals that are sent to your cells, but more importantly, also, because they're electrochemical signals, they emanate from your body. Okay, that's called an electromagnetic field, and this is pure science. You can read about it everywhere. That electromagnetic field influences those in your environment. So another thing that people can choose to do is, if you're going into a meeting with a spouse, a child, where you think there might be some confrontation, or at work, go into a more coherent state. Go into your heart-focused breathing, feel a positive emotion, and sit there for 5 minutes. Your heartbeat will regularize, will become more even, and you will emanate a more coherent electromagnetic field, which will affect those that you're going to interact with. Right?
Wonderful.
So this is a really important tip. And this will help you in menopause as well, because again, irritability, anxiety, low mood can all be neutralized by these techniques, both of them, right?
Thank you, Katrine. Sorry, go ahead. I was just saying, thank you so much. Those are very, very useful techniques. So you've taught us 2 quick breathing techniques. One is sniff, sniff in, and then relaxed out. The other is to take more breath in and a quick breath out. Then you
Yeah.
taught us about heart math, where you breathe 5 in and 5 out, all the while focusing on the heart or putting your hand on the heart. And the last one is to feel a positive emotion. That was absolutely spectacular. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
So what I wanted to ask you was, how has this intelligent stress management system, as you called it, how has it helped you or any of your clients? Have there been examples, concrete examples that you've had?
Oh, tons of concrete examples. I like to try things out before I teach them. So I've been practicing working with my thoughts, which I didn't go too much in, which, Joe Dispenza, Greg Braden, and Bruce Lipton speak about. And I've been, and Louis Hay, who I love. So I've been working with transforming my thoughts, which then transform my emotions, my emotional patterns now for very focused for a good 3 years. And I find, that if I'm in an airport and my flight is canceled, I don't freak out as much. I choose a better thought. I always arrive on time, or, my journeys are always smooth. And I prepare myself when I go to places, and I find I get better results. So that's one thing. The other thing too is that what I've seen with patients is that, again, patients may come in that are menopausal. They might come in for, a sprained ankle. But when we start to use this approach, they'll say, "Oh my God, my urination is better. I'm not peeing as often." Last week, a woman said, "I really noticed that I get less hot flashes because I find myself being less angry. I'm able to step away from the situation, do some of the techniques that we've worked on, or prepare to go into a situation." The other thing too, that I work sometimes with a woman, and then they ask their family to come in and do a session together, either on Zoom or here in the clinic. And what they've found is that they have an easier time relating to one another. And it started because when the mother was using these techniques and these approaches to prepare her responses to her family, she started to teach them to members of her family. And they would do things like what I call do an inner weather report. Every day you wake up and you think, what's my inner weather? Stormy, maybe cloudy, maybe a little sun. And that really helped the harmony of their family. And in fact, the woman told me last week again that her child went to school and told one of her friends, and now her little group of friends practice that, which I think is really nice. So it has a knock-on effect. It helps other people. And just even if you do it, it's like when you go to a party, you're not going to be attracted to the person who has bad vibes, which is really the electromagnetic field. You're going to be drawn in by somebody who has a positive vibe.
Lovely. Now, tell me, Katrine, do you have any other advice for the people listening into this chat?
Yes. Take time out for yourself. Menopause is a transition from a fertile time to a time to turn inwards for your needs. Looking at what your body, your mind, your soul needs, where you're at. So number one, take time for yourself, whether it's on the bus, focusing on yourself instead of reading 20 million things. Take the time to get a treatment, to allow your body to relax, to hold up, to let go of those held up emotions, and give yourself some time to practice. Things take time to practice, right? Even if it's twice a day for 30 seconds that you practice some of the techniques, or maybe a time you feel stressed, just choose one time during the day and it'll become a routine. And that's what Joe Dispenza said, that you need to practice things and rewire your brain so that it becomes a habit. So that would be my big advice. Give yourself time to practice and give yourself love.
Thank you, Katrine. That was so wonderful. And you quoted some of my favorite people. You talked about Joe Dispenza, you talked about Professor Huberman, you talked about Bruce Lipton, Greg Baden. I think, thank you so much. We've had an incredible talk. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And thank you for listening in. I was talking about Transforming Menopause Through Intelligent Stress Management with Katrine, who's a manual therapist. And this is Anshu Bahanda at Wellness Curate.